Good morning, Courageous Church. I am so excited to be here with you today and to be looking towards Easter together with our new series called Sifted. During this series, we're going to be looking at Jesus' journey through the cross and specifically his disciple Peter's faith journey that he went on in relationship with Jesus as he watched him go towards his death and his resurrection. And even though we're apart in some ways right now, we're across screens, this is a great time as a church to be unified, to look forward together, to remembering why we're here, why we're the church. It's all about this. It's all about the fact that Jesus died for us and that he's alive again. And I cannot express my excitement for this season. But today, I want to start with telling you a little story. So I remember early in our marriage, we lived in Colorado and Tim loved to drive. I didn't really drive all that much. I drove when I needed to, but I didn't take initiative to drive. If I was with Tim, he was the one driving and I was just fine with that. And I managed to avoid living in Colorado, driving in the mountains pretty successfully for a long time. Those mountain passes in the Rockies can be pretty treacherous, especially in the winter, where you get like your rock face on one side of you and it's a little 2-lane road, and on the other side it feels like you're driving on the edge of a cliff. And then sometimes it's snowy and there's semis coming the other direction. I had no desire to drive in the Colorado Rockies. And I remember one time we were celebrating Tim's dad's birthday at a place called Copper, where we were snowboarding and skiing. And on this trip, the last day of this weekend we were there, Tim woke up to get ready to go hit the slopes, and he went to put in his contacts, and somehow there had been a leak in his contact case, and one of them was totally dried out and hardened, and he couldn't wear it. He decided to still go snowboarding. But he's good at snowboarding. He's the one that helps me be courageous as I'm worried I'm gonna tumble down a mountain. But he went snowboarding with his one contact in, but by the end of the day snowboarding, he had this headache and he was like, I can't drive back. I can't see well, I need to take out this contact, I can't drive. And so we at this point had one baby, and we were baby in the backseat of the car, and I have never driven in the mountains before. And I, for a partially dark drive, am going to have to, in the winter, navigate the mountain passes for the first time with my baby in the backseat. I was so nervous. And I was forced all of a sudden to learn something that was difficult, and to learn something that was a challenging lesson. And throughout the drive, Tim was really patient with me, reassuring. I'd occasionally, when a shoulder would appear, I'd pull off on the dirt shoulder to let the line of about 30 cars behind me pass. And I just navigated real slow around these turns, and eventually we made it through, and eventually I accomplished this thing. And after that point, I grew in confidence as a driver. I was fine driving in the mountains. But that experience strengthened me. It was difficult, it was stressful. But because I had to hit that experience head on, I came out the other side with greater knowledge and with greater strength. And this is true in many areas, whether it's in a relationship we have, whether it's in our personal growth, and even in our faith. We encounter times of difficulty, times of sifting. And those times of sifting, when they come, because they do come, they can cripple us or they can make us stronger. And now, sifting in biblical times, this sifting was not what we think of today. If we have this fine mesh like sieve and we're supposed to sift powdered sugar over our cupcakes or scones, that's not what it was. So sifting in these times was this forceful almost like a violent sort of motion that had to happen. It took a lot of strength, where grain had to get thrown into the air, picked up and thrown into the air, and anything that wasn't the good stuff could get blown away. And the Bible talks about, in a similar concept, talks about gold, how when it's heated up really hot, how impurities rise to the surface so they can be removed. And these are common pictures we find in Scripture. Now, and the same is true in our lives. There's also a parable of the sower in the Bible, where it gives a picture of different people's faith doing different things. And one of the pictures of the sower is that sometimes a person's faith can spring up really quick. They can be really excited. They're like this brand new plant, this brand new growth. But then the cares of this world, struggles come up like weeds and choke out the plant. And what I want to talk with you guys about during this series is when you're sifted. Like it's going to happen. It happens throughout our lives. What's going to remain? And as we're looking towards Easter, we're going to look as kind of our focal point, this point right before Jesus' death on the cross, where Peter's faith was sifted. Jesus said to Peter, also called Simon, Jesus gave him the name Peter. But Luke 22, verse 31 and 32, he says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you, meaning the disciples, like wheat. But I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and returned to me again, strengthen your brothers. All of us have times of a testing of our faith, whether our faith is brand new or whether we've been Christians for a long time. We all have seasons of struggle. And I want to look with you at this time in Peter's life in this series. And I want us to be able to learn together from the journey of his faith. Now, let's talk a little bit at where Peter started in his journey. We know him as one of the 12 disciples. You may think of the disciple who walked on water, or the disciple who denied Jesus. But where he started out, he was a Jewish fisherman along with his brother Andrew. Both of them became disciples of Jesus. We know by looking at Acts 1 that Peter would have gained some sort of familiarity with Jesus at the time of the baptism of John. In Acts 1, Peter says that all the disciples were with Jesus from the time of his baptism to the time of his ascension. So in some way, Peter would have had some familiarity with at least that teacher named Jesus from the time of his baptism. And this means that what this tells us is that there was a journey Peter went on from initially knowing that there was this guy named Jesus. Like there was a journey from that point and seeing him baptized to the point where where Jesus said, on this rock I will build my church, about Peter. And we see in the early church, Peter being one of the key leaders of the church that the church is built upon. Like there was a journey there, like there is in our lives. Now, Peter first met Jesus when he was met him personally when he was introduced to him by his brother. His brother was a disciple of John the Baptist. And in John 1, we can see it says, the following day, John was again standing with two of his disciples. As Jesus walked by, John looked at him and declared, as Jesus walked by, John looked at him and declared, look, there is the Lamb of God. When John's two disciples heard this, they followed Jesus. Jesus looked around and saw them following. What do you want? He asked them. They replied, Rabbi, which means teacher. Where are you staying? Come and see, he said. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon when they went to the place where he was staying, and they remained with him the rest of the day. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the men who heard what John had said and followed Jesus. Andrew went to find his brother Simon and told him, we have found the Messiah, which means Christ. Then Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. Looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, "Your name is Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas," which means Peter, and the Bible tells us, which also means rock. So I want to ask you this morning to reflect on, where are you in the journey of your faith? In this first message in the series, we're going to see where Peter was with Jesus in the early stages of his faith. We're going to see, are you at that initial part where maybe you had seen Jesus, maybe you had heard of him, but you haven't yet met him for yourself? Maybe you know that there's something important about God, about Jesus. Maybe you should learn more about him. Maybe that's why you're watching today. But you can't say that you've really met him for yourself. Maybe like when Peter first met Jesus for himself, maybe you're at a point where you recognize Jesus is telling you something about who he's made you to be, where he's saying, yeah, this is who you were, but this is who you're going to be. Like with Peter, where he said, yeah, you were Simon, son of John, but you're going to be Peter. You're going to be a rock. Maybe you sense Jesus calling you to something more in your life. See, Peter went on to see Jesus do miracles. He saw him heal his own mother-in-law in his own house and heal many other people. But at this point, he was still working as a fisherman until Luke chapter 5, verse 1 through 11. And Matthew and Mark record this account in less detail. If you hear the passage about Jesus going along the beach and saying, "Come, follow me," and they dropped their nets and followed him, same story. Luke 5 just records it in greater detail. It says, one day as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. When Jesus had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it's deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again." And this time their nets were so full of fish they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon their boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." And this is another point we have to come to in our journey of faith. When we truly realize who Jesus is, we also realize who we're not. When we realize truly Jesus is God, when you see Peter here say, "Lord," when you truly grasp that, you also recognize your own sin. And maybe that's where you're at today. It says, "For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the son of Zebedee, were also amazed." Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. And maybe that's where you're at today. Are you at the point where you recognize Jesus as God, but you haven't yet left everything? You're still holding on to your old life. You're saying, "Yeah, I know he's God, but I'm not ready to just jump in." But you feel Jesus saying, "Come, follow me. Don't hang on to anything else. Go all in." This meant Peter left his security. He had a business as a fisherman. That was his livelihood he was walking away from. He walked away from his income. He left a lot to follow Jesus. And then Peter went on. There were a lot of people that followed Jesus. At one point, we see crowds following Jesus at one point. At another point, we see him choose 72 of his disciples from among his disciples. So we don't even know what that full number was, but he chose 72 of them to go out and do ministry at one point. So there were a lot of people following Jesus, and that number fluctuated as people saw him do miracles and then got upset about his teaching. Like, that number fluctuated. But Peter was chosen as one of the 12, among the 12 leaders that Jesus was going to spend day in and day out with and train them as leaders of his church. And then, as we'll talk about later in this series, Peter was actually one of the 3 people closest to Jesus in this world. Peter, James, and John were the very closest to Jesus, and they got to see miracles that none of the other disciples saw. Peter would have seen amazing things up close. He proclaimed Jesus was God. He had the faith to do things none of the other disciples did. And yet, right before Jesus was arrested and taken to be killed, Jesus told Peter that he was going to deny even knowing him. And not just once, but 3 times. And Peter was going to have to wrestle with that guilt of knowing he denied even knowing the Lord that had walked with him for 3 years and that he proclaimed he would die for. That he denied even knowing him 3 times. His faith was about to be shaken as he saw his Lord killed. His faith is going to be sifted and tested like gold in a fire, or like that wheat being thrown into the air so that anything that's not like the strong stuff, anything else is going to get blown away. Jesus said, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat, but I have pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers." And that is what this series is about. When I prayed for you, Courageous Church, and I prayed, God, as we go towards Easter, as we study and learn and grow together, and we remember your death and your resurrection for us, what do you want to say to Courageous Church? What do you want to say to the people listening today, to each one of you? And he highlighted this passage to me. So friends, family, when you're sifted, what will remain? What is the state of your faith? How will you handle challenge? Because sifting will come. You have an enemy. But if you believe in Jesus, you also have Jesus praying for you, just like he did for Peter, that your faith will not fail. When the heat gets turned up and life begins to shake, and who you are at your core is sifted, what will be left? Will you cripple? Will you get mad at God, get isolated and withdraw from God's church because you encountered hardship or tragedy? Or in the sifting, in the heat, will you press into God, press into community, and allow yourself to be purified, allow others to walk alongside you, and allow yourself to be made stronger, and to become like Peter had to become the rock. He had to go from being the fisherman to being the rock that God could build a church on. Your faith has to go through a journey to become who you were to who God has made you to be. When you're sifted, what will remain? This world we live in, it runs from challenge and discomfort. They emphasize happiness and do all the things you can to have just happiness, to have comfort. It's like an all-out life pursuit, like to be comfortable, to have all your needs taken care of. But that's not what you're called to if you're a disciple of Jesus. You're not called to run from challenge, to run from discomfort, to pursue the things of this world. You're called to be courageous, to face challenge head on, and to trust in faith that God is there with you in the fire when it turns up. Now, Peter, after he became the rock, after he became the leader that God had made him to be, he wrote 1st and 2nd Peter in the Bible to the church. And it's interesting, he writes in this passage about this, and it's so interesting to reflect back on his story as you hear him write. But he says, so be truly glad, there is wonderful joy ahead. Even though you must endure many trials for a little while, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. It is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. Now, Courageous Church, this has been a hard year. It has been hard in many ways to be part of the church in this year. You can't gather together in a building together. And if you're with us in the city of Seattle, this is not a culture that celebrates following Jesus. You have to be prepared as a follower of Jesus to boldly love others who may disagree or even hate you. As Jesus never promised our lives would be easy, but he promised he'd be with us in them. And he wants to strengthen your faith, and we can have immense joy even in struggle. So Courageous Church, if you're struggling today, whether it's with depression as we are coming out of a cloudy winter, whether it's isolation because of COVID, whether it's a struggle in your family, in a relationship, in your job, in your finances, whatever it is, if you press into Jesus right now while things are hard, or if things are good now and you make a decision now that when trials come and when sifting comes, that you're gonna press in. Then instead of crippling, instead of turning inward and self-focused, or instead of letting bitterness to grow, you can actually have great joy and come out stronger and come out closer to the picture of who God made you to be if you press into him in the sifting. Now, throughout this series, I invite you to join us in this journey. Join us as we remember Jesus' life and his death and his resurrection, as we celebrate that he's alive. And as we look at the journey of Peter's faith journey and learn from it as he follows Jesus, and how does this reflect on our own lives, and what are the lessons we can learn about sifting. As a church, God is purifying us. He's making us strong so we can be who he's made us to be. Now think about for me where you're at in your journey. Do you know about someone named Jesus that maybe you should learn more about? Are you at the point where maybe you've met him in person, and maybe you've seen him do some cool things, but you wouldn't say you've decided to follow him with everything? But maybe you feel him calling you to that. And maybe you're listening today saying, like, Hannah, I am all in. I'm following Jesus with everything that I am, and I just can't wait for what God has ahead. Wherever you are in your faith journey, I want to invite you to journey with us through this season and to read the book of Luke with us. We're reading passages online, live, every day on social media. You can go back and listen to the first chapters that were already done, or you could read them for yourself. Send us questions as you read the book of Luke. Allow your faith to be strengthened. Allow your knowledge to be deepened. Spend a greater focus on prayer and in God's word in this season. Let's grow together. And if you send us your questions, whether you comment them on live videos you post or in sermons, or whether you private message them to us or put them in your Connect card, there's a link in the comments for the Connect card. If you send us your questions, we'll compile them and we can answer them live. If you guys have questions, we'll get on and we'll answer them. Let's grow together. Let's learn together. Let's walk this journey of faith together, no matter where you're at in your journey. We are so happy to be journeying with you, and we're happy that we're being made stronger together. We can't wait for Easter coming up with you. We'll see you soon.